Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Chihao from the Business and Industry Engagement Team, Global Division 3, SBF, and I'll be your host for today. The FYI Festival is part of the program of the Global Connect at SBF, which is our globalization initiative in partnership with Enterprise Singapore. So on this note, I'd like to thank you, our principal partner, Convera, on behalf of SBF for their strong support to the entire FYI Festival initiative for the second year, formerly Western Union Business Solution. Convera is now considered as the largest non-bank B2B cross-border payments company in the world. Just a quick housekeeping before we get started. Please take note of the following house rules. Please note that the chat function will be disabled. There'll be no live Q&A during the webinar due to time constraint. So if you have any questions, drop us an email at globalconnect@sbf.org.sg or post your question in the Q&A panel in the Zoom platform. We'll collate them and answer them right after this event. This event explores how in our race to build a sustainable food system, the world's growing demand for food, and disruptive agricultural supply due to the climate change. So it's important for us to diversify our food supplies and relook our food choices. In this webinar, we gather local food innovators who have translated interesting ideas into reality. So let's join us in understanding how they have achieved sustainable food sources and increased food security alongside legal consideration. Okay, before we start today's session, I would like to walk you through SBF and our Global Connect at SBF initiative. The initiative was formulated to assist Singapore companies that are looking to internationalize for the first time, as well as companies that are intending to expand and deepen their presence in overseas. We help Singapore companies to first learn about the country and the business opportunities through sharing of useful resources, advisories on free trade agreement, and structured training. We also conduct overseas visits for members to let them experience and understand local business and culture. Secondly, we help companies to land on business deals through B2B matching, facilitate market and business development through identifying the right market for businesses and assessing the business capabilities. We currently have 3 SBF overseas centers, also known as Singapore Enterprise Centers. They are in Jakarta, Ho Chi Minh City, and Bangkok to provide on-the-ground facilitation and market assistance. Lastly, we assist Singapore companies to localize in these markets for a sustainable business presence to help them grow and integrate with local networks and strengthen their presence. Next, we'll conduct a poll to explore your interest in taking your businesses overseas and at which stage of internationalization your company is currently at. Please help us to answer the poll, please. Our first speaker for the day is Mr. Ernest Tan. Ernest is the head of Agri-Business and Animal Protein Sector Solutions Group for UOB. He's responsible for developing sector-specific solutions by leveraging on industry insights, data analytics, and value chain analysis across UOB's wholesale banking business. He's part of the Wholesale Bank's task force in driving sustainability-related financing. So Ernest, we'll hand the stage over to you, please.
Thanks, Chihao. Hi, morning, everyone. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedules to join this webinar. I think as Chihao briefly introduced, my name is Ernest, and I'm from UOB's Sector Solutions Group, where I look after the agribusiness and animal protein verticals within the consumer goods sector. I think first of all, I'd like to thank the SBF team for organizing this webinar and also giving me the opportunity to share with everyone UOB's view on financing the future of food. So in my presentation, I'll be sharing a bit on our view of how the future of food will look like, as well as some ways that we are supporting this future. And to close it off, I will also share some case studies where UOB has the good fortune to support. So if we move on to the next slide. The next slide as well. Oh, sorry, one back. So when we talk about the future of food, Asia will inevitably be brought into focus. I think this is because Asia is going to be the key growth region, with total spend on food expected to double from 4 trillion to 8 trillion between 2019 to 2030. And really underpinning this growth is the vast population in Asia, which already accounts for 60% of global population. This will be coupled with the growing affluence as well as purchasing power in this region. So all these come together will really lead to a burgeoning middle class. For example, by 2030, 70% of China's population, or about 1 billion people, will be in the middle class, while 50% of Southeast Asia population will be classified as middle class. So typically the middle class, the first items that they spend on is food, and this puts a strain on food systems, which will face certain challenges moving forward. So if you move on to the next slide. So the first challenge that I wanted to highlight is food security. I think this is really a top of agenda and really in the minds of many of the politicians in this region. So as I already highlighted, Asia will account for the growth in demand of food. However, if you look at the chart on the left-hand side, you will note that the arable land as well as the water per capita available in Asia is much lower compared to countries like Australia and USA. Therefore, the resources available to produce the food required in this region is limited and is likely to be insufficient. Another key problem that the agriculture industry faces, especially in this part of the world, is that it's comprised of many smallholders, and these smallholders typically have difficulty in accessing financial support. So, and this has really hampered the growth of this industry. If we move on to the next slide, please. Another aspect of food security is really brought into the spotlight by COVID-19, which is the vulnerability of this region to supply chain issues. So for example, in the case of soybean meal, which is actually a key raw material for animal feed production. So this typically accounts for 30-40% of the raw materials required for producing animal feed for poultry or for swine and other kinds of animal protein. You can see that this region is very dependent on imports. And this is also similar for other raw materials for food production, such as wheat as well as corn. So these supply chain issues have really brought to mind the need for self-sufficiency in a more urgent manner. If we move on to the next slide. Another aspect of food security is the planning to fulfill local demands through imports. So this planning is not easy. I think the illustration I have on this slide is example of the time it takes to plan importation of chicken into the UK. However, I think this is just as relevant. I mean, we all saw recently how the ban on live poultry or poultry exports from Malaysia to Singapore affected the local supply. And from here, you can actually see that from the moment an import order is placed, it may take up to 60 to 120 days from what we call the checking in, basically placing the day-old chicks for growth. For it to reach the consumers, it can take up to 60 to 120 days. So to fully rely on imports, especially in the face of supply chain disruption, it increases the planning difficulty. So if you move on to the next slide. For the next few slides, the key challenge that I want to talk about is food safety. So food safety is a big challenge, especially in this region, given that the trust level about quality and safety of domestic agriculture remains low. So diseases such as avian influenza, African swine fever, even your common swine flu is prevalent, and the continuous occurrence of it brings down the trust level of the biosecurity of the farms in this region. So that actually is a lead on to the next slide, where a lot of the players would then deploy or use antibiotics as a way to curb these diseases. But as you can see from this chart, which is taken from a academic report known as the Review on Antimicrobial Resistance, what is happening is that the the widespread use of antibiotics in food production is actually increasing the level of antimicrobial resistance amongst humans. So antimicrobial resistance basically means that these antibiotics have no more are not effective in preventing or curing various illnesses, and the widespread use has resulted in higher deaths that are resultant from such antimicrobial resistant infections. So this places extra scrutiny on the production methods of agriculture players in this region, with the need to focus on food safety without the widespread or irresponsible use of antibiotics. So the last challenge I wanted to talk about is on the next slide, which I think is a key agenda, is sustainability. So firms need to produce food sustainably to earn that social license to operate. So we see more and more examples of MNCs and large corps committing publicly towards different sustainability initiatives. And these are really driven by consumer demands. And these consumer demands will continue to dictate or really form the way that food production would be done moving forward. So for example, if we look at the next slide, one key issue with rising demand of food and protein in general is the increasing methane emission. So as the demand for animal protein increases, the number of industrial farms in this region would also increase, and this may lead to more and more GHG emissions. And with I think a global as well as regional focus on net zero agendas, these industrial farms will need to pay attention to how they manage the waste as well as GHG emissions to be able to keep in line with these net zero initiatives. So the key challenges are really in the form of food security, food safety, as well as sustainability of food production, which brings us to the next slide. Overall, I think with these challenges in play, linear growth of traditional food and agricultural production is not an option, and innovation is required across the value chain. So there is a need to adopt agri and food tech to enhance these three elements of food security, food safety, as well as to ensure sustainable production. So in my next few slides, I'll be talking about a bit about what the bank has in place, some of the things the bank has in place to support this transition towards sustainable and sustainable food production, as well as for food security. We'll move on to the next slide, please. So in UOB, I think we understand and we appreciate the importance of green and sustainable financing to support the growth of any industry, in particular the food industry as well. But the difficulty, or a lot of times the hurdles for companies to obtain such financing, is the need for frameworks. So to put in the context, typically to qualify for a green framework, you would a green financing, you will need a framework to be put in place. This framework has to be advised by consultants or by certain sustainability coordinators. And obviously there would be a cost to it. There would be additional, I think, management manpower or hours required to put this framework in place. So to really lower the barriers to entry or lower or increase the accessibility to green and sustainable financing, UOB has, on our end, we have put in place 4 green umbrella frameworks, which means these frameworks have already been advised and signed off by various sustainability consultants, different frameworks. So, and companies that qualify or are in the eligible activities would then be able to tap on these frameworks for green and sustainable financing. So the 4 frameworks are just on screen. We have a framework to cover real estate sustainable financing, a framework to cover smart city. So within smart city, one of the components is really waste management, water management, but it also covers climate change adaptation, which includes the adoption of controlled environment agriculture. We have the green circular economy framework to really support the use of or recycling and upcycling of waste. And finally, one of our latest frameworks is the green and sustainable trade finance, where we support the sourcing or the use of green or sustainable products in the production. So as I mentioned, these frameworks have already been verified by third parties. Therefore, it has taken away that burden of the requirement for companies who wish to gain accessibility to such green and sustainable framework. If we move on to the next slide, another issue that we see a lot of this, how should I put it? Yeah, innovative food production players such as controlled environment agriculture or aquaculture producer is really that they are in the scaling up stage or really in the startup stage. So because of that, they typically would not be in a position to obtain traditional financing. But what we have understood from really interacting and meeting such players is that a lot of them have a very good product, and a lot of them have signed MOUs with off-takers, strong off-takers for their product. So the bank has leveraged on this particular aspect and introduced financial supply chain management, where we can support these players on the back of such offtake. Basically, we will discount the receivables to ensure or improve the liquidity of these startups. So I think the next few slides is where I will touch on certain case studies or real-life examples of the bank supporting certain projects. So we'll move to the next slide. For the future of food to happen, I think there is a need to really transition traditional production, traditional businesses to adopt various agri-tech and digital initiatives. So I think one of the projects that we were very happy to support was a Singapore Poultry Hub. So this is the first smart and green poultry slaughtering facility in Singapore. And this factory would deploy smart technologies such as robotics, Industry 4.0, as well as IoT to improve their capacity as well as productivity. In addition, the waste produced out of this factory would be fully recycled for other users. So that would add additional income stream. Another traditional business, which was a Bond Group, this is basically a food production, food distributor, as well as a poultry player as well, is where we introduced this solution known as our UOB M-Collect. It's an app-based collection application. This is to help the company reduce cash handling. So this reduction in cash handling really improves the efficiency as well as the back-end integration when they have to do reconciliation thereafter. On the next slide, these are examples of how the bank has supported the increase in local food production, as well as really try to embrace the changing technologies in terms of controlled environment agriculture as well as aquaculture as key elements or key contributors towards the food security agenda. So one of our clients, Sky Greens, is an urban agriculture solutions provider where they do urban farming, and they have a patented design and technology. So this technology is then exported to micro farms in Thailand, China, and Vietnam through a franchise system. And UOB was fortunate to be able to support them in this regional expansion and to help them in their scaling up. Another company is Barramundi Group. So Barramundi Group is the largest sea cage barramundi producer in the world, with production facilities in Australia as well as in Singapore. So they really focus a lot on the sustainable production as well as sourcing of raw materials. And Barramundi Group was one of the pioneers in taking up UOB's green and sustainable trade finance, where we finance the procurement of sustainable feed for them. So this, we believe that by supporting the demand for sustainable sourcing, it would drive the improvement in production methodologies upstream as well. And finally, on the next slide, with all these new technologies and new production system coming into play, I think collaboration is very important. One of the companies that we supported in expansion into Singapore is Enable, which is actually a German indoor vertical farming. And this is one of the farms that has basically got the funding under SAF's 30 by 30 Express Grant to ramp up food production. Their vertical farm should be commercial should be into commercial operationalization by end of this year. And UOB was very glad to be able to work with them to provide guidance on the various government agencies and real estate options in Singapore, so that they are able to set up their facility in Singapore successfully. So I know this has been a very short session. I try to keep it quick because we have 10 minutes each. And I think on the next slide, basically is an overview of the various frameworks that the bank has in place. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thanks very much for your attention, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the session.
Okay. Thank you, Ernest, for the informative sharing. If you have any questions, please post your question in the Q&A panel at the bottom of the screen, and we will collate them to answer them right after the event. Next up, our next speaker is Nicholas Goh, founder of Nature's International Commodity Private Limited. He's an accomplished farmer who set up Twin Agri, Cambodia's first composting facility to produce and sell commercial scale compost. He has more than 10 years of experience and was singled out as a promising entrepreneur, helping to uplift the lives of Cambodians during former President Mr. Tony Tan's visit to Cambodia in January 2017. So without further ado, Nicholas, over to you, please.
Thank you. Yep, right, I'm here. Hi, good morning. So basically, I have been farming in Cambodia commercially for the past 12 years. I think today's slide is really to share with everyone the challenges and the need for aspiring farmers who wants to look at expanding overseas as well. So Twin Agri is a company that I developed in Cambodia 12 years ago, where I actually started off with manufacturing of fertilizer through using waste, and I actually developed a lot of compost, and I use earthworm fertilizer. So this is basically what I produce. We produce about roughly 1,000 tons of fertilizer a month, and we supply locally to our farmers, and we're trying to engage them to understand the so-called food conversion ratio, FCRs. We try to teach them about, in a way, kind of efficiency in terms of mixing, using chemicals, as well as using organic fertilizers. All right, so next slide, please. So a lot of our farming activities also involve creating education for the younger generation. We do a lot of trainings for the university locally in their agriculture universities, where we actually teach them integrated farming and technology as well. All right, I'll just go through the slides as we and the pictures and as I explain. So as you can see from this slide, basically I'm located in Phnom Penh, and I understand that many of you all have heard a lot of stories, about what's happening now in Cambodia. I think every country and every place there is its challenges, and it takes a lot of courage in a way to go step forward and go out of your comfort zone and to engage yourselves in whatever activity that you plan to do in that foreign land. And I think that one of the challenges that we have obviously is language barrier. And again, I took a lot of time to learn how to speak the language, and I learned a lot of time to understand the culture, and I took a lot of time to understand how things are done within the country itself. So that was my part of my development of this particular business in Cambodia in 2015, 2014. So it reached until around 2017. Next slide, please. Yeah, where we had our ex-president who came and visit us, and I was very grateful that he actually acknowledged and tried to support all these Singaporean companies which are in Cambodia, trying their best to develop different kind of businesses, trying to develop different kind of businesses within that country itself. And as I was the only one doing agriculture, I think I was fortunate enough to be picked up to be identified as one of the contributors in the agriculture sector in Cambodia. Right, next slide, please. Yeah, so as you can see, we do a lot of trainings, road shows, and actually I did a lot of trainings with the farmers themselves, because I was in the malls, I was in the temples, communities came together, there were like hundreds of people. So I think it was very important to help them understand the need of being able to use what is naturally available, yet what is commercially available, and integrate together, and creating an integrated, what we call symbiotic relation in the farming techniques. Next slide, please. Yeah. So again, we did a lot. We have a lot of different kind of models, systems. For example, hydro, aquaponics. But ultimately, for me, I'm still a soy person. So I'm actually using. We do soy farming in Cambodia. I have 72 hectares. Part of my daily routine is to drive the tractor, morning, plow soy, harvest, pruning the trees. I grow rice, I grow mango trees, I grow dragon fruit. I have pigs, chickens, and cows. So we have about maybe 10 or 20,000 of these chickens and about 1,000 pigs. Yeah, something like that. So every morning I gotta wake up, I make sure that the pigs are, especially the mother pigs, the babies all get to drink the milk, so that I have to arrange them in order so that all take turns to drink milk. Yeah, so yes, we have also established in Southeast Asian, as you can see the picture above, those were all the ambassadors from Southeast Asia, from Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, Thailand. They all came over to my farm, and we actually had a kind of an opening where we were trying to figure out how to create a strategy where we are outsourcing and creating a supply chain out into these Southeast Asian countries, as our borders are just next to each other. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I built my own biodigesters as well, right? And yeah, so these are what we call, the biodigesters are what we use to handle municipal waste. The municipal waste are actually mainly for food waste that has oil and salt, right? And then and we have a lot of organic waste like tree leaves, branches, as well as all the other kind of farming waste, where we actually feed it to the earthworms on a large scale, right? Next slide, please. Yeah, so these are just some of the pictures that we actually have engaged many, because we are also a consultant for commercial farms, and we build farms that are up to 1,000 hectares, so that we create an integrated system in terms of irrigation, in terms of monitoring system, in terms of commercial vehicles that is needed to develop the farm, and using the least manpower. In my experience, we realize that even in these countries that are doing farming, they are also struggling with manpower, because people are improving in their lives, and none of them really want to go back into the farming. So as we improve in terms of technology, we are also looking at re-strategizing the way we educate the young agriculture students, how to manage equipment, how to manage technology in a way that it can be operated within an environment where there is internet, where there is different what we call the relay stations as well. All right, next slide, please. Right, so in Singapore, I'm one of the bidders of the urban rooftop car parks with SFA on the multi-story car park. So as you can see, I'm actually using a system. Sorry, back please. Yeah, I'm using this system to actually create a business model here. Apart from vegetables, we are actually running on a membership where we actually engage community to come in and harvest their vegetables themselves. And we produce about 2 to 3 tons of vegetables a month, as for now, until I'm fully so-called expanded, fully utilized. And we find that the model of developing food security for us in Singapore is very different from what we are doing in Cambodia. In Cambodia, yes, you're able to do commercial scale, but yet at the same time, you need to cover a few other chains of supply chains, as well as distribution chains that you need to handle. Whereas in Singapore, we are looking at smaller models, and so-called we are able to sustain and supply to the community around, engaging elderly folks, disabled, not disabled, I mean physically challenged, and we are providing them jobs here as well. because the way we handle it, the way we do it here is that it is very least of a manual labor. In my experience also, I think it's very challenging for Singaporeans to be a farmer because we are really not used to the kind of environment. I thought it was fun, you know. I became a farmer, and it was actually a hell. So it was so difficult, but I had no choice. I had to just bite the bullet and went on. And a blink of an eye, it has been 12 years. So yeah, so we actually developed so-called urban structures, urban systems where we are able to farm. And if you can see these systems in the center, it's actually a waste conversion kind of system where the earthworms are there. The earthworms will consume all the organic waste, and then the vegetables are grown by the sites. All right, next slide, please. Oh, sorry, yeah. Yeah, so we are constantly innovating. We have developed many different kind of feed, microbial kind of feed enzymes. We have also done fertilizer enzymes, and the kind of things that we are doing is basically on a large scale where we are actually using all the kind of waste that we have in Cambodia per se, both in the city as well as the agri waste, to convert it into reusable energy, or what we call upscale these products into something that is useful for the farmers. Yeah, next slide, please. Right. So part of our strategy to go into overseas to do agriculture is that we get support from the local ministries and authorities, and because of that, I know some of the so-called local authorities where they are actually helping us to push this business as well as this intent further. The second is to create the education and awareness to the public, and third, outreach to farmers, and then expand to reach investors both locally and overseas. These strategies are always ongoing because it takes a certain period of time where you can actually change the mindsets and the culture and the practices of these traditional farmers. Next slide. Yeah, so basically, I think in order for us to engage into this food security and food sustainability part of our Singapore kind of direction, I believe that every one of us have to do our part in managing your own ways, all this kind of thing, the small little things. But ultimately, if we are really going to go wanting to look at creating a sustainable business, we have to look at how a model that fits the framework of Singapore, rather than looking at overseas kind of framework, kind of business farming models, and then try to implement on Singapore, because Singapore is very unique. And I think we need to be very clear on what works for Singapore's terrain, environment, and culture. Yeah. Okay, I think I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Right.
Thank you, Nicholas, for the insightful sharing. Okay, next up, we have Ms. Tan Lacey, CFO from the Shiok Meats, founded in 2018. They are the first cultivated seafood and meat company in Southeast Asia and the first cultivated crustacean company globally. Lacey will share with us how their product aims to counter the issue of excessive resource required in the traditional seafood farming. So, okay, over to you, please, Lacey.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having Shiok Meat in this section. We are actually glad to actually share with all of you about our Shiok Meat technology and our journey, how we are able to actually enhance the food supplies of Singapore in the next few years. I think just to actually listen to just now what Agnes have actually from UOB have actually mentioned about the food supply. Next slide, please. We have actually now contents with a very limited land and the water and also the resources, and we're also having a challenge about the diseases that it allowed. Therefore, we need to actually apply some antibiotic on the food production itself. So I think on this slide, we are actually anchored to just now what UOB have actually sharing. we are going to actually expect that the global population is to actually grow from the current 6 billion to 10 billion by 2050. And then for shrimp meat, we are actually focused on the crustacean, and the entire crustacean market that we're actually looking at, it will be about 147 million US dollar. So there are many actually challenges on the seafood supply, that from the overfishing to the mislabel, as well as the water pollution and the microplastic that in the ocean and the seawater itself. Next slide, please. I like to actually give this perspective, and I think this slide is very interesting. Many of us actually didn't realize that in order for us to actually produce 1 kg of the shrimp or 1 kg of the beef, you actually generate the carbon footprint, same as that we actually travel from Singapore to Paris. So just imagine that the traveling time from Singapore to Paris is 13 hours, and how long that we need to actually spend to actually consume 1 kg of the beef and the shrimp. So it means that this food production actually creates a lot of carbon footprint, as well as the CO2 to the entire mother of Earth. So I think it's important for us to actually figure out the way that how we are able to actually using the advanced technology, that we are able to continue to generate the food supply, but to have a minimum environmental impact. Next slide, please. In Singapore, I think since we grow up, we actually being actually aware that the water is a very precious resources that we have. We are actually a very small island. We do not have a big space that we are able to actually collect the rainwater. And therefore, you're just actually looking into that to actually produce 1 ton of the shrimp, we need to actually equivalent to about the water usage of an average Singaporean for the 3.5 years. So which means that it's a very important for us to actually figure out how we are able to actually using certain technology, like what shrimp meat is doing, to actually continue able to actually supply our food to the Singapore citizen and also to the globally. Next one. As just now mentioned, that shrimp meat actually founded 2018 is actually founded by 2 stem cell scientists, Dr. Sandhya and Dr. Kai. Our technology is actually using the stem cell technology to actually produce the seafood as well as for the red meat. So stem cell technology, as you all know, that is used by the healthcare sector. Just about 8 years ago, we actually started to actually explore whether we are able to use it for the food supply as well. So for us, it is like what we wanted to have is that using the stem cell technology which enable us to actually produce the food. And what will be the technology merit of this? For example, we are able to actually produce the shrimp meat with 4 to 6 weeks of the production time, as compared to the usual farming way, will actually take you about 9 to 12 months. For the lobster will be 3 to 5 years, and for the crab will be another 9 to 12 months as well. So which means that with a quicker production process, which allow us to have a lower impact into the environment, we will not need to actually use huge piece of land as well as the water for us to actually produce same output of our seafood and the red meat to the consumer. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, shrimp meat are actually founded by 2 stem cell scientists, which is Dr. Sandhya and Dr. Kai. Currently, we have more than 45 of our team that working in both product offering, and they actually came from the 6 countries. Next slide, please. In this infographic, we like to actually give you a very simple and easy to understand how shrimp meat technology will enable us to actually produce both seafood and the red meat. So you just actually imagine that we cut a leaf from the plant and we're actually putting them into the greenhouse environment. And after a few weeks, you are able to actually harvest the veggie. I think just now Nicholas have actually sharing with us about the farming way. So we are actually using the same methodology that we are actually extract the cell from the animal, and then we're actually putting them into the incubator. So in this incubator, they are actually in the control environment, and we actually give them the nutrient that the seafood that they actually require. And after 4 to 6 weeks, we are actually able to actually harvest the minced meat. So just imagine this is like the beer brewery production. So at the end of the process, instead you have beer, you're actually going to actually have the meat products. So in this case, is that we are able to actually, because they're actually in the control environment, and in the clean room and production environment as well. Therefore, we no need to actually put any antibiotic. The cell itself will not actually encounter for any diseases, and we are able to actually ensure that we are able to actually have same meat products to the consumer with the same taste as well as the familiar feeling that you're having for your seafood and the red meat. The next one, please. Singapore is the first country that we have actually launched this regulatory framework for this cultivated meat. So we are actually using stem cell to actually produce the meat, and Singapore actually take the pride that we actually launched this framework globally. We are the first country to do it. In Singapore, in 2019, the government actually launched a nationwide initiative, which what we call 30 by 30, which currently about less than 10% of our food supply are actually produced locally. So Singapore government have this nationwide food initiative plan. By 2030, which is about 8 years from now, 30% of our food supply should be actually sourced locally. So that's why you have here a lot about the urban farming, vertical farming, aquaculture, and of course on the cultivated meat as well. So this is something that we actually take the pride that we are able to actually, at Shoot Meat, we are able to actually continue to enhance the food supplies of Singapore, which allow us that even they will have any supply chain disruption as a result like the pandemic, we are continue able to actually feed the Singapore population. The next slide, please. So over the years, in the past 3 years, we have actually showcased our products. We have, for our prawn, we have actually showcased as a siu mai, which is a very famous Hong Kong dim sum. And we also showcase our lobster and also our crab prototype. For the crab prototype, what we actually present will be actually the Singapore famous chili crab with the mantou. And the invited guests, when they actually taste our product, they're actually able to actually find the familiar taste that from the conventional product that you actually experience. So I think something that we are very happy and confident about our technology. The next slide, please. As I mentioned, for Shoot Meat, we have actually 2 product offerings. The one will be on the seafood side, the other one will be actually on the red meat. For the red meat, we are actually focused on this R&D through our subsidiary Gaia Food. So what we're actually looking into, like this red meat that we are actually focused on will be actually the structured red meat. What does it mean? It is like when you actually go for Korean barbecue or you actually go for Vietnamese cuisine, they will have the sliced beef that on your table. This is what the Gaia Food has been actually focused on. Next one, please. Shoot Meat actually after the 3 years of our hard work and as well as with the team effort, we managed to able to actually set up the first plant of the crustacean in globally. And our plant has been, mini plant has been up and running since November last year. We have this privilege that actually honor that actually have the Miss Graceful to actually do the opening of our mini plant last year. Next one, please. This will be some of our technology and our product timeline. So we are currently still under R&D. We would like to actually submit for regulatory approval by early next year. And currently, based on the timeline and subject to the approval from the regulatory authority, which is Singapore Food Agency, we plan to actually launch our product to Singapore by end of next year in the restaurant. So very soon that all of you, if you came to actually have a first taste about our product, you are able to actually do so in Singapore by end of next year. Next one, please. Shoot Meat is a Series A startup. Since we actually started our operation 4 years ago, we already actually raised total 30 million of the fund from globally. Our investor actually came from Europe, US, Korea, and Japan, where you are able to see some of the name that you might be familiar in this slide. And of course, Singapore government, since we are actually enhance and strengthening the food supply of Singapore, they are also invest in Shoot Meat through the venture arm of the Enterprise Singapore. Currently, we are actually raising our bridge round for about 20 million. This bridge round will be actually enable us to actually have our pilot plant that we are going to set up in Singapore by next year, so that we are able to actually use the fund, this new funding that we raise to actually support this fund, the plant operation. The next one, please. Yeah, I think the final slide that I would like to actually share with all of you will be about like what will be the consumer acceptance about this new technology. I would like to always actually relate this to something that we're very familiar today about the Facebook and the Google. So I think 20 years ago, we are actually not comfortable. Do not believe that Facebook will know us better than ourselves. We did not actually realize that we could actually use Google as a search engine to search anything under the sun. So I think what ShootMeet actually looking into it is that we are actually using the stem cell technology to provide the new food supply to the Singapore population and also globally. And we actually did 2 surveys, both in Singapore as well as in Hong Kong. In Singapore, more than 78% of the consumer and more than 95% of the consumer in Hong Kong, they actually already hear about cultivated meat. And they're actually open to actually try our products because I think they are actually looking into the sustainability ethic and as well as from the healthy perspective. So a lot of them, when they actually now become a vegetarian because of the ethic reason or because they're concerned about the water pollution, once they actually get to know about our technology, they are actually wanted to actually put our meat product as part of the diet. I think we are actually doing a lot of outreach activity to the consumer to make the awareness about our technology. I myself just actually attended an outreach in the Choa Chu Kang Library last weekend. So we are actually reaching out to the adult as well as to the student to actually make our technology to be actually well known to the mass consumer. And what we eventually wanted to have is that we actually provide you the same taste of the products and then with the minimum environmental impact to the mother of them, which only all of us actually live in this in this space. Yeah, that's all. The next slide, please. And this is what our mission is: the same great taste and better for the planet. Thank you. This is the presentation I would like to share with all you this afternoon.
Thank you, Lacey, for the good sharing. Okay, our next speaker is Sean Goh. Is a co-founder of Agri-Food. So the company, they identify structural inefficiencies in the food supply chain and capitalize on them. So they source out products at a discount and pass on those savings to the customer. And Agri-Food's vision is to become the leading e-commerce platform in ASEAN that specializes in clearance items, which uses in-house content to engage our customers. And their goal is to have a farm-to-table supply chain. So over to you, please, Sean.
Good morning, everybody. Next slide, please. Hi, I'm Sean, one of the co-founders of Agri-Food. We are a social enterprise that we started in Singapore back in 2021, January. And we have grown quite a bit in the sustainability space to where we are today. Next slide, please. So I'd like to also take this opportunity to thank SBF for inviting us because our company stands very much for sustainability, right? So our core is we actually look for inefficiencies in the food supply chain. So the food supply chain is actually a very, very long one, as explained by Ernest at the very beginning when he was talking about when the chicken was hatched all the way to when it was shelved in the supermarkets. So this being a very long supply chain has its risks, be it supply and demand mismatches or whatever not. So what we do is we look for inefficiencies and we capitalize them. And usually we get these products at a discount and we pass on these savings to the customers. Our vision is to become the leading e-commerce space in ASEAN that we specialize in clearance items. And how we do it is actually a bit different from most people. We like to take a very fun approach on this. If you can see on the bottom right of the screen, we like to use our comic characters to engage our clients and our customers and the audience, because we feel that with such tools in the market, it actually makes buying fun. You know, we want to make the whole sustainability journey for people a fun and lively thing that incorporates in part of their lives. It's not just, oh, we buy groceries, you know. We need to save the earth, you know, can be a bit dry sometimes and it can be a bit overused. So we want to insert a very fun element into it. And that's what we stand for. Next slide, please. So some of the SDG, next slide, please. Slide 2, please. Slide 3, please. Yeah, some of the SDG goals that we stand for is very much in number 12 and number 2. So number 12 is our top priority because consumption, responsible consumption is what we look for. We want people to change their habits on buying. Locally sourced goods is one, but even shorter shelf life goods is another, because these goods are still excellent for consumption. There's nothing wrong with these. Sometimes it's government regulations that force a best before date onto products, and such that, you know, we want to use these products still can be used and be sent off to different parts of the value chain. Another part that we look for is SDG number 2, which is zero hunger, because with these extra produce you have in the market, you know, it can be then diverted to the groups that are vulnerable and or needy in the world. Next slide, please. So just going down on the agricultural supply chain, this is actually how long it is. From agricultural production, we have issues under, you know, poor crop harvest. It depends very heavily on weather. You know, sometimes you might have death of animals that causes waste. Then as we move on to the post-harvest stuff, you have transportation issues, you know, storage issues that actually cause damage of your goods, you know, food loss in this part. Sometimes they don't even meet your criteria. So this is one issue as well. In some countries, we have seen that, you know, improper harvesting has caused, you know, just waste by the road. You know, they don't even bother loading it up on the container and just leave it there because it's just not worth the extra dollar to do so. Then we move on to processing. It could be, for example, doing meat cuts. It could be, you know, spillage or trimmings, right? You want that ribeye to be looking that perfect. But what about the side cuts? What happens to those? Then Agri-Food plays very much in the distribution chain. When we start to transport the items across countries, across suppliers, there are a lot of S&OP issues, so sales and demand forecasting issues that affect the market. Sometimes, for example, Singapore being a very much majority importing market, you will have many importers, you know, over importing at certain times of certain product. And this is where Agri-Food comes in. We will help in the secondary distribution market, at least in Singapore standpoint, to help push off and clear off and consume all these excess produce in the market, because otherwise they would just be burned and or buried or just, you know, left out to rot in today's context. And we move on to the final chain of the supply chain, which is consumption. Consumption is where we have waste at home, individually in the kitchen, et cetera, right? Sometimes we even purchase more than required because, you know, it's just all by the way, or it's out of convenience or out of bundling by supermarkets or suppliers. So this is the 5 big chunks in the entire supply chain that happens in the world. And Agri-Food plays in the distribution space. Okay, next slide, please. So you might ask, how do we do it, right? So what we do is we buy over excess stock from the market. So for example, importers, you know, import say 4 containers in, they can only sell 3 by contract. Then they have this one other container that, well, what do I do with it, right? So we actually help these importers recover some of their working capital and also clear out the warehouse space, because these guys are a running machine. So goods come in, goods go out, goods come in, goods out. You know, they don't want any dead stock as well. So we help with that dead stock. Yeah, and we sell it directly to our consumers via our e-commerce website. So even despite all this, you know, the market for groceries is always growing, because as mentioned earlier by Ernest and some of the other speakers, as the middle class grows in prosperity, the propensity to spend increases as well. Hence, that's why people can afford more things and more high value items. That's why we have more waste. It's an everlasting problem that you can't be solved, unfortunately. So that's the direction that this is going. Next slide, please. So very simply, the distribution chain is like this. I'm sure you guys pretty much know it. Is method of import into Singapore, or at least in Singapore context, is through ships or air. then it goes through large aggregators, which is then split out to wholesalers, and then split out to, again, smaller retailers. So this is very much simplistic way of explaining the distribution chain. Next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier, cost and waste come hand in hand, actually. So just to give an example, a lot of times suppliers are bound by contracts to bring in and to buffer a safety stock for given clients in any market, right? So what happens if the customers don't draw down your safety stock, don't draw down their buffer stock? What do they do today? What do suppliers do today? They just burn it and they get rid of it because they've already made most of the money in the top 80%, is the 80-20 rule. So we help to then monetize that further 20%. So this helps to release the stress, and it's also a win-win for the suppliers and consumers at the very end of the day. Next slide, please. So what do we do actually in Agri-Food? There are two key problems that we tackle, at least in the Singapore standpoint. One is we help with the transportation mishaps. Because although the government talks about a 20 by 30, 30 by 30 green plan, and they pump in a lot of good money to strengthen and bolster different avenues of the entire chain by having vertical farms and everything. There's one key element that also cannot be ignored, which is the supply chain, because every farmer, every supplier will deal with supply chain somehow or another, right? And then so hence Agri-Food is and wants to be that alleviating tool in the market, right, to help with these issues that each of these suppliers face. So we want to help with clearing out the excess produce in Singapore and around the region, as well as managing some of that storage space that these customers might face. Yeah, and our solution is we resell it directly through our platform and through our website that you see down at the bottom, on the bottom left and the bottom right. Okay, next slide, please. And how do we do it? I think this is actually the most fun part of it. We have a fairly decent social media presence, at least in the Singapore context. We like to put sustainability as a very fun way of engaging the topic. We use cute characters, apple and pear, to illustrate this point, right? We don't want to say, oh, this is just a word chart that we downloaded and everybody. We want to animate things so that people can remember at the end of the day, because I think the consumption trend is moving towards this space and sustainability, and we want it to stick, and we like it to stick, because if the government and at least the region is pushing such a strong thing, we need to start it also. We need to tackle the education part of things, at least for our younger generations. Yeah, so our comics on our Instagram helps with this one. We have a Telegram channel as well to push out where we broadcast sales posts that we do as well. Yeah, and also we've been engaged by some multinational, some larger corporations to do sustainability branding for them. So I think as a whole, Agri-Food stands for sustainability, and we're very much into this whole plan of supporting the government's 30 by 30 plan to change people's consumption habits into more sustainable habits. Yep. Next slide, please. Oh, and next slide, please. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Sean, for the good sharing. Okay, our next speaker is Mr. Min-Zi Lin, Principal, Baker McKinsey Wong and Liu. Min-Zi will be sharing the critical aspect of cross-border transaction in Agri-Food businesses. You will briefly go through the various business models to be considered when you're venturing out in the region, right? So Min-Zi, over to you, please.
Thanks, Chee-Hao. Afternoon, everybody. Okay, I'm seeing that I'm the last person keeping us all between lunch in this thing, so I'll make it quick. Only 10 minutes. So next slide, please. No, what I'm going to be really talking about is the legal aspects. And well, I think first thing is we need to cover what do we mean by by going abroad, bringing your business abroad, right? I mean, so there are basically 5 different sort of business models I'm going to be covering. And from where you're talking about less commitment to greater commitment in terms of the kind of capital you need to and resources you need to put in. They are, from the left, direct trading. That's where you trade directly from Singapore to, with your overseas customers. You don't have any operations elsewhere. You just find your customer, you trade directly with them. The second one is where you find a partner in whichever country you're actually wanting to sell your product to. You find that person and that partner becomes your local distributor. The third one is where you actually set up a joint venture with the distributor. That's one way to actually kind of capture some of the profit that's made from the distribution of your product overseas. The fourth one, at that fourth level, is actually production joint ventures. That's where you actually are exporting your production facility, right? You're actually creating a new production facility overseas. It's just that you're de-risking it because you're actually partnering with a local partner in that country. Sometimes you have no choice but to do that because of foreign restrictions, which I will, foreign ownership restrictions, which I'll cover. And the last, which is the greatest commitment one, that's actually going overseas to start a wholly owned production facility, right, for your business. And that's what I call greenfield projects. So I'll just keep to this slide, and I won't move slides. Just to cover very quickly, I think for local, for direct trading in local distribution business models, you would, I think, first thing you need to do is figure out whether or not your product actually can even be sold in that country. There are some rules as to what agricultural products can be sold in some countries. For example, in Indonesia, up until 2020, you couldn't really sell agricultural products in that country unless, and now they've moved it away. They've actually said, well, if there is sufficient local demand for local products, then imported products can be brought into Indonesia. So that's just an example of the fact that there are restrictions against what you can sell into a country. So be aware of that. The second thing about trading with a country is that if you say you want to go and develop business in that country, you have to be very aware of the risk of being caught as someone who's doing business in that foreign country, because that actually then comes up with all kinds of unwanted tax consequences, right? So usually what you can do if you really want to explore opportunities and you have that kind of resources you want to expand in that country, you can do a rep office. It doesn't do business in that country, but what you do is you go and do get market intelligence, find out more about the lay of the land. But if you do any kind of sales contracts, it'll have to be between your head office in Singapore and whoever is in that foreign country, right? Your so-called local representative there cannot actually go and enter into contracts. Okay. Along the spectrum, in terms of joint ventures, distribution joint venture or production joint venture, it means that you are then actually investing in that other country as you set up a joint business with a local partner, whether it's a distribution kind of business, whether it's production, right? So in terms of that, you have to be aware of things like foreign ownership restrictions in a business. For example, I think for distribution, there may be foreign ownership restrictions depending on the kind of industry that you go and set up distribution for. So, in places like in Vietnam, in Indonesia, you have to be aware of that. The way the businesses are also set up in these countries is quite different from Singapore. I mean, Singapore is quite easygoing in that unless you're a bank or financial services provider, generally speaking, you don't really need a separate business license, and you're not that restricted in terms of what you do or what you can do, right? But in places like Vietnam, for example, or Indonesia, you can be an importer of the product, but you can't be a local distributor. It's a separate business license, it's a separate business altogether, and you have to be well aware of what kind of activities you want to do and what sort of foreign ownership restrictions there are in place that may prevent you from actually owning it 100%. If you want to say, set up a local distribution company on your own. The other thing that we see is further on, I mean, as and when these sort of restrictions are lifted, sometimes we do have clients who want to move, say, from a local distributor model to a wholly owned subsidiary distribution model in the foreign country. Very often, as I covered earlier, your products that you bring in, these are usually registered, and the product registration is kept with the local distributor. When you're moving from a local distributor to a wholly owned model, then I think you will need to get your local partners' cooperation. It's very important, because if they don't cooperate with you, then you're going to be stuck because the registration isn't going to move. Okay, so that's one point that I've seen a few times. So that's in terms of joint ventures, distribution, and the like. In terms of setting up greenfield projects or production joint ventures, I think to layer on top of all the other issues on product registrations, foreign ownership restrictions in the business itself, you're actually looking at, for production kind of projects, you are then looking at owning the land or using the land. I mean, in a lot of countries in ASEAN, as a foreign investor, you can't own the land. You have to be aware that you can only lease it. So that's the case in Vietnam and Thailand. Right? Your business license will not allow you to own agricultural land. You can lease it. Indonesia is similar. It's not ownership, but it's really a land use right. So it's different again. I mean, in a sense from how it's done in Singapore. I mean, you can, here it's either TOLs, that's a short-term license, or you have a proper lease for 30 years. And in these other countries, it may not be so straightforward. Okay, so that's, in a nutshell, those are the kinds of legal issues that I've seen, encountered for businesses that want to go overseas. If you have any questions, yeah, feel free to contact me. Yeah, thank you very much for your time. That's all.
Thank you, Min Zi, for the informative sharing. Okay, if you're interested in a one-on-one business consultation with us, simply email to ie@sbf.org.sg. We'll be happy to meet you to offer a consultation session. Okay, there will be an upcoming webinar on Africa, the future of African energy, oil and gas, and beyond. So if you're interested, please scan the QR code provided on the slide to register or contact us for more information. So we will appreciate if you could give us your feedback on today's webinar. Your feedback is valuable to us, so it will help us to improve our future events. Kindly scan the QR code on the screen to access the feedback form. So on behalf of SBF, we would like to thank everyone for making this event a success. And thank you for joining us today, and we will see you again.